Before we get going, Teresa.
Hey, so first of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone who's joining us again. This is now the third discussion on the writer's calling. It's also a discussion on craft. But I think a lot of the times when we talk, we forget about the fact that a lot of people are on different journeys, in terms of writing, in terms of storytelling. So this really is open to everyone, whether you're the beginner who's just finally taking a chance in making a screenplay, or the advanced veteran who has loads of information to share with us, but perhaps wants to have a refresh or a different take on some core ideas. So today we're going to be talking about crafting characters. So really this is something that ties into our previous discussion, which was about the scene, in that the scene and character are the defining attributes of story and of structure. If you think of every great film you've ever seen in a story in general that you've ever seen, a lot of it is defined by the characters that you've engaged with, that you've watched and you've seen their lives play out, whether it's tragically, dramatically, or with great comedy or great romance. But we primarily watch films for character. And that should highlight that actors are really the window of the soul into the film for the audience. So by giving them that aspect, by giving such a strong character that defines everything of the film, that's your first great asset to telling a good story. So what Gavin and I are going to do right now is talk a bit about perhaps how we approach character and what we think the fundamental basis of character is. And I have my views on character and really how it defines a lot of great films. But I know that for some of you out there, maybe the ones who are working in TV, the ones who are working in long form telenovelas, the character is not necessarily the be all and end all of the story, but is a product of, the plot line or the storyline that's playing out for this season. So I just want to open up to Gavin first to talk a bit about, character, what it means to him, what it means for a story any stories that he's ever made. And if you don't have good character, can you have good structure as a result?
Well, I'll maybe that last question let me come back to, but those first couple of questions, I guess, again, they're big questions. So one thing you might hear me say on this discussion group many times is that story is kind of a blueprint for life. It is really, and it shows how like the external reality functions in relationship to the internal reality. And at the core of that is character, because there's this huge question like what really is character. We hear the term all the time, and it's one of those essentials that are just so close that sometimes one can't see the wood for the trees, because it's just, in a sense, it is story. And so character, is that fundamental, like what is a human being? What is a person? What is a character is so essential, we all have character and we all are characters, but what that really means might mean different things to different people. But to me, it really is the essence, like who is a person? I think we're expressing character in every moment. Like we cannot help but express our character, and story is kind of showing us how the world relates to our character, to who we are. And obviously, the fundamental of every story is some character who's growing that character, who's, growing themselves, who's being challenged to grow themselves one way or another. And, every story then basically becomes, a blueprint for how we change and how our character changes and what's needed to move someone from being in some place in their life to being someone new. In one particular way or other. And it's in that statement, one particular way or other, that we see stories, because stories give us the essence of what it is to grow through one particular journey, mostly. So, it might be someone learning to be courageous, or it might be somebody who's kind of discovering that they shouldn't give too much of themselves, or someone, finding the balance in giving and receiving, to put that a little bit more clearly. And they might have, as an aspect of their character, it's very common for women to give too much of themselves because they're kind of trained to do that. And that aspect of character where one gives more than one receives is an aspect of character. And a story will come and show what it is to move from that place to a place of learning balance. And in relationship to giving and receiving, at first the person might give too much. And then when they realize they do that, they might decide, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then they give too little. And finding that balance is the dialectic of story, you know, when you come to find virtue in the character. And virtue of character is essentially, the root of virtue is the same for virtuosity. And when we talk about virtue, really what we're talking about is like an excellent, someone who's excellent in action, in being. And essentially every story is about someone kind of learning the excellence of a virtue of character. And the story kind of will always move according to how the world reacts to their expression of character. So on one level, it's the most fundamental thing there is. It's like kind of, you know, something that we come in, you know, your character's molded by where you're born, who you're born, you know, the various attributes that we give characters, because those things influence your perception of life, your understanding of life, your relationship to life. But you know, it's something that perhaps also then, you know, supersedes those and, you know, is bigger than just, you know, where you came from or what you are. It's like partly a collection of all these biographical details. At the same time, it seems to be that it can also be something more, because no kind of combination of biographical details will necessarily give you any way of being. It's always, there's something perhaps bigger. But in essence, you know, story, we were going to discuss story, we're kind of figuring out whether we're discussing story structure this week or character this week. And just before the call, I was saying to Tobias, so I'm glad it kind of worked out this way, because in some level, they're not actually different questions, because story structure is really just the process of a person's character changing. And it's structured according to how it changes. So the three-act structure that we're all familiar with is generally how character changes through challenge and suffering. That essentially only by being pushed into awareness of subconscious flaws and being forced by the world to feel the pain of holding on to this flaw, do we move to that place of being willing to surrender, let go, to end the second act, and, you know, choose to embody a new way of being, which is essentially to grow our character. It's not necessarily, I think, the way it always has to happen. I think if anyone looks at how changes occurred in their lives and how they grew from one stage of another to another, then they will find in that a story possibility, because really every story really is about a character changing. And if change has happened differently for you, then maybe you can have a different structure. The reason I think we're so obsessed with story is because it is that blueprint and it shows us how we evolve. So I guess that would be my broad answer. I didn't come back to your last question. I don't know if you do want to repeat that or not, but I think that's my intro for character.
Yeah. Look, I think perhaps the question really isn't good character. If you don't have good character, can you have a good story or structure? But rather, if you have limited character, you know, character that isn't changing, can you still have good structure? You know, I mentioned before about, I mentioned before, really, I was in discussion with you. It was the idea of having an active character and a passive character. So an active character in this, if we're going to go into craft a bit, the active character is someone, of course, who through their decisions, through their actions, changes the story world or reacts to the story world, but is a fundamentally involved in the world itself, shaping their story, their plot, their narrative. Whereas a passive character is in which the world acts on them, and it acts on them almost as if they're an observer up until a point, maybe a critical choice about doing something. So my question really is, if you don't have a character who's changing or is actively showcasing a part of something, really, can you still have a good film? Can you still have a film that plays out with structure, with something that's happening? I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. And I guess answer for me is twofold. One, to draw a distinction there, because the two primary Greek genres are comedy and tragedy. And in that sense, and where it comes from, comedy is a person who's challenged to grow and does, and tragedy is someone who's challenged to grow and doesn't. So there are, of course, lots of stories where people don't change, and they can be very compelling. And those are essentially tragic stories. And the tragedy there is that they fail to grow, because stasis is in itself a kind of death often, because one is essentially stuck in a place where one could be so much more, and then life often really punishes you for that, in its desire to get you to evolve. But active and passive, I think characters are also quite a complex philosophical and also cultural question, because certainly in American culture, which is our kind of film saturated benchmark, there's an ideal of a character who's like kind of able to just take action and change the world. And in some sense that is kind of the ancient heroic ideal, where it says to us as people that if we want to, we can just take matters in our hands and make stuff happen. And I don't think it's always true, and I don't think it's true of all life. So often it is that life just happens to us and we are responding. And I think there can definitely be compelling stories like that, but it's about how you play it, because it does feel good for an audience to be with someone who's vicariously who's taking action, who's like, I've got this goal, I'm going for it. And it's one way things happen, but it's definitely, I think, not true of actually most people. I think most people are actually designed to dance with life and to respond to what comes up. So I think if one can, a passive character isn't necessarily also one who doesn't change, and is not someone who doesn't do interesting things or have interesting things happen. It just means that they're carried by events and they're responding by events, and they're not actively bringing about the next step. But I think often, that can be very interesting. It is just about how it's executed for me.
I mean, I largely agree with everything you've said, because when I think about character, and I really do think about it in its nutshell, and that's the story idea. If we go back to log lines, I know everyone hates them, but really the log line is the story in a nutshell. I mean, story in a nutshell, and that is what is happening to our character. What is it? What is the thing that's defining them, and how does the story play out as a result? I think that character and structure are intrinsically tied together, and really the idea is, why else are we talking about these people if it's not because they're facing some kind of dilemma or crisis? That's why the story exists, because we want to see that play out. And really, by having someone as compelling as Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, that carries the entire film for us, because we want to see what happens to him. I mean, you've mentioned actually Greek plays, you have either tragedy or comedy, and I think of really some of the best films we've ever really seen are plays on those two things. We think of, say, for example, The Godfather. So we have Godfather Part 1 and we have Godfather Part 2. The reason why they're placed together is because if you think of Michael Corleone's heroic journey, the perverse heroic journey, becoming a mobster and everything, but that heroic journey in the first part leads to him surviving that world and becoming the master of it. And then in part 2, because he refuses to change, because he refuses to have mercy on the people around him, it leads to his ultimate tragedy, his ultimate downfall in part 3, which is, of course, he's killed his brother, he's destroyed his family, and that's because he refuses to change. So that's something that I found to be very interesting. Some of our favorite stories are about characters, because they refuse to change, their world crashes around them. And I think that's the power of character. It's this thing that allows a story to breathe, allows a story to exist. And it's not formulaic. Sometimes you'll have the most interesting person in the world define an entire story that you wonder, well, does this fit into third act structure, fit that 5-act structure, one or 2-act structure? It's more like just by exploring that character, you've got a film playing out. I think that if we can think of anything that is like an exercise for any person that is dealing with a character or is dealing with a story, I suppose the one thing that they should be asking themselves before they start writing a film is to think about the story itself and think about what is this character doing, or what aren't they doing, and that what is happening to their world as a result. I don't know if is that sort of something that you think about whenever you come up with story ideas and start crafting characters within those stories, or is it one of those things that you think of the person first and then the story comes?
I've got a different approach because I came at it with like an intellectual objective in mind when I started writing. It's like, how do I tell stories that raise consciousness, and how do I tell stories that give the understanding and the perception that I want, that sort of remold people's stories of life. And so I came from an intellectual place that is actually very difficult to write from. So I'm definitely not going to recommend my own approach, but at the heart of every story, that the first thing that you actually do really need to figure out, there's two things: is basically what does the character want, and what do they need. And their want, their goal, is the essentially what drives the objective plot. And what do they need? It defines the subjective plot, which is like their emotional growth. And the relationship between these two things is basically how the world responds to an expression of character and an expression of desire. And for me, when we start with like the protagonist, I think it's very important. I mean, absolutely, one has to ask, what do they want? What do they need? But one should also ask, why do they want it, and why do they need it? What it says about them that they want it for this reason rather than that. And it's not really talked about often, I think, in screenwriting books that I've seen. They kind of deal with the fact that, they have an objective. But why they want that objective really suggests the character that they are, and also how the world will respond to them. Because often what happens at the midpoint is the character will get insight into their real need. And at that point, they might give up on what they want because they realize that that want was out of alignment with what they need. Or it shows them sort of how the two are related, and they get some insight in terms of how to get what they want by being by becoming what they need. But often, like if a character is going into something with ill intent, what do I want? I want, lots of money. And why do I want that money? Because, I just want a big boat, and I think I'm going to be really awesome. People will see me as awesome if I got lots of money. So the story that will unfold around a character who's pursuing money for that reason will be very different from the story of someone who's maybe chasing lots of money because they really want to uplift their community and have made it their whole purpose in life to do whatever it needs to take to make that ultimate goal happen, versus the one who's doing it just because they want self-aggrandizement. That those different characters will have different results in the world. Essentially, within the seed of their desire is their karma, and then that's what plays out. So ultimately, I feel like really understanding character and who people are and why they behave is at the absolute root of our art, because it also leads to then how the world behaves. And it really is one sort of fundamental thing. So for me, it really is, it's not something that one, I think, can learn, to understand character and to understand how character is expressed. I think as writers, it is almost a fundamental intrinsic interest that we each have. And I think that we all, any real writer is very curious and involved with that question in themselves, and looking at themselves, and then very naturally curious about it in others. So I don't know if there's an exercise. I can just say that, that's the place where we all need to look and grow and focus.
I mean, it's really interesting that you put it like that, because what you've mentioned is probably the one thing that helps us figure out stories, want versus need. As you mentioned, one character could want money for something, another character could want money for something, and they'd probably go around doing the same thing, trying to get money. But it's because of that, in essence, what they really need in their hearts, what they really need in their lives, that completely defines the story for you. So, say, for example, I would think of Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, he wants money for a completely different reason than Aaron Brockovich wants money. It's this whole idea that can completely define the story for those characters. And I think that if the worst thing we can do as writers is to tell stories about the same kinds of characters over and over again, because we're not exploring at that point, are we? I mean, we're not asking ourselves deep fundamental questions about what if I was this person? What would I do in this particular case? And look, I mean, a lot of people will say, you know, the purpose of art is to inform, the purpose of art is to educate, but we never look at it that way whenever we're trying to tell a story. We're picking away at something that interests us. We're picking away at something that is diving, you know, into our part of the subconscious. And do you think that as a result, when we writing characters, are we really writing other people, or are we unpacking a part of ourselves? Are we unpacking a part of our subconscious when we are creating characters? I mean, do we find ourselves best represented by the works that we create? You know, the people who we you know, asked to come to life. I mean, if you think about character is all of these things, but primarily character in film and in TV is what they say and what they do. Does that sort of reflect ourselves as well whenever we're putting these characters forward?
I think you're hitting it on the head, you know, in the sense that I think we can only really write ourselves. You know, I think a creative act is an expression of our own unconscious, and essentially every script I've ever got from a writer, you know, essentially the theme of it is a theme that's common to their lives. I think essentially we kind of explore, like we have, I think, particular karmic themes, particular challenges, aspects of character that we work on in our lives. And you can do it, I think, at very, very like in a spiral of evolution. And, you know, you can tackle courage from the place of cowardice, or you can tackle it from a place of, you know, very refined, you know, you know, I have courage, but, you know, when is my courage positive and when it's negative, and, you know, just higher and higher levels of the same theme. And I think different stories happen at different levels of themes, but essentially it's always our theme. And the characters that populate our films are expressions of our unconscious. And as much as we might be able to project ourselves into other characters, I know certainly in my journey, it's very helpful to have met people who are like the characters you're writing. And when, you know, I draw an inspiration, say from an ex-girlfriend or from an ex-boss or something to write a character, I can only give my perception of who they are and how I expected they would behave. And I might be quite accurate at that, or maybe not, but it's always coming from within the framework of my own perception. I can never really escape that. So I think I have to embrace that. And I know you're a big fan of auteurs, and, you know, the auteur, I think, is someone who's just really clear on their own voice, and, you know, is giving that full expression. So it becomes clear that their characters are their characters. Like you know, the Coen brothers, their characters, even though they're very diverse and they're different, they have a, you know, a humor and a bigness that belongs to the Coen brothers. So yeah, I think we're always, I guess my basic point about characters, we cannot help express ourselves, and as writers, that's what we're doing. Every moment, every script, we're expressing ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about that. In fact, I wanted to talk a bit more about, you know, that whole idea of putting ourselves into these works that we produce. So I'm going to actually use two examples, and one of them is Aaron Sorkin, you know, the famous screenwriter, now director as well, of many great things like West Wing, Social Network, I mean, all of these wonderful stories that have played out with very, very, very distinctive characters dealing with very distinctive problems. And these are problems that Aaron Sorkin obsesses over in his day-to-day life. And I think sometimes I wonder if character sometimes lends itself to being us exploring our own fantasies, us exploring, you know, the what if I was that person kind of thing. And really, how do we sort of divorce ourselves from going too far down that line and having something that feels very much, oh, this is perfect, this is biographical, I wish, you know, this is the way things should happen. How do we then, you know, we can have an interesting story idea starting from there, but how do we, you know, make that character someone who isn't us, but is someone who's a completely fleshed out person, exploring that possibility? Do you think that there is a method to that, or is it something that we have to, you know, explore and just let it happen?
Also a good question, and I don't know if there's. Let me try a circle around it. So I think just say it once more. Just give me the question once more. Give us the essence.
Yeah, it's more like this. It's like, how do we let the stories we tell not become obsessive fantasies of what we want to the world to be or whatever. How do we let that be how do we let fully fleshed out characters who aren't us, tell those stories? Is it that line that you have to, you have to put down?
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you. I remembered actually what I wanted to say, because I think the answer is actually quite simple, and it's truthfulness, and whether we can be truthful with ourselves and then totally naked for an audience, because essentially, are you writing your fantasy, or are you really writing life as you've experienced it? And characters, also, you had a second sort of part of that question there, whether you can truly flesh out a character, and that there is also really, really, it doesn't quite work, I think, for any character, perhaps except your protagonist. You need, there's a thing, in terms of fleshing out character and revealing character, because our jobs as writers is to reveal character, which happens through actions and choice, and it happens through context. You can never really see much of a character except what's happening in the moment. So each scene will maybe show some part of it. Like, it's, I like dating analogies and getting to know people, because it's that thing. If you go on a coffee date 5 times, you'll just see the coffee date version of the person. Take the same person and be in a dangerous situation, and suddenly there's a whole other person there. Or if you go somewhere where they're stressed, or if you go somewhere, into their family, or you go, you just kind of see all the different layers, because they all exist in one moment. It's the same character, but you can't see it except in context where the action calls it out. So with the protagonist, it's a bit easier because they're present in every scene, or almost every scene. So you have an opportunity to see more of them. With the supporting characters, not so much. And then obviously you very rarely spend as much time imagining who that person is, if it's a supporting character, as you do with the protagonist. So, the actor's job is basically to really imagine and flesh out that whole character, and then bring it to the world based on what you've done. But definitely, the more as a writer you can flesh out a character and know they're, really who they are, the richer your scenes will be, and the richer every moment with them will be. And I think, really fleshing out those characters and creating really big, more detailed biographies that really show who the person is and their worldview and their life circumstances is just one of the key tools to creating good scripts. That every character should have one. Every character, the whole story should be thought through from every different character's perspective, because it will be different. It's like a whole, everyone is a different story, and it informs the primary line. So I don't know if it's within the context of a film. I don't think you'll ever see a full character, because you're trying to see like one aspect of their being. Whether it's the relationship to courage, or whether it's the relationship to giving or receiving, or the relationship to spirit, or whatever it is that you're exploring. So I don't know if it's possible. I mean, what do you think? What would your answer to your question be?
Look, I think that, and I think that was the second person I was going to mention. You have David Mamet, who is, of course, once again, another celebrated playwright, screenwriter, who then became a director on his own right. Because he comes from the other side, where there's an idea that he explores through characters. So it's not that he's living out his fantasies, or he's exploring a personal exploration. He's exploring, what does the idea mean? It's a very philosophical way of dealing with stories. If you watch any one of his films or any one of his things, you'll see that. You'll see this breaking against the waves discussion, if that makes any sense. So when I look at, say, for example, how I look at my own characters and my stories, for some reason, whenever I, think of a person, or when I go to sleep and I wake up and I think of the dream I just had, first and foremost, it's a person exploring a thing that I wanted to explore. And that ends up being a problem for me, because I have to then spend time and say, is this person me, or is this person something that is not fully realized, but is this person someone who has their own heartbeat? And I think I don't start writing until I figure out, is this a person that has their own heartbeat? And I don't know if that's what lends success to the stories that I tell, or if that's something that only works for me. Because I personally don't believe that I could fully realize a person within a film, as you've said. But I do think that there will be enough shades presented of that person in that film. And really, that's my goal whenever I'm writing about characters, even if they're secondary characters, they're not protagonists, they're not antagonists, or anything like that, is to provide enough shades of something, enough shades of action, of what they say, et cetera, for you to imagine an entire world or an entire existence outside of this film for them. I think that I've done my job right if someone watches the film and says, I completely know that guy. I know that guy. He's the guy I saw the other day. He's actually my uncle. Or that I know that lady. That's my sister. And that's, yes, you have the limitation of 1.5 hours to 2 hours, sometimes even 3 hours. And you're absolutely right. You can't ever show the full shades of the person. You can't do Tony Soprano, all those number of seasons in a 1 or 2 hour film, which is another reason why TV films, films that are derived from series never work, because you're looking for that same level of discussion, but you don't find it in the film. But I then look at something like Godard's Breathless, or Robert Bresson's Pickpocket, where you have some of the simplest people you'll ever meet in your life. Some of the characters who almost nothing changes in their lives, but because they're obsessive about something, because they want to do something, you feel an entire human being present. And I guess it's a fine line. I mean, I specialize in films. I don't do series. So I don't know what it's like to be in a writing room with tons of writers discussing and trying to figure out, this episode we're going to explore this, we're going to explore that. And I don't know what it's like to have actually sat with a character for 13 or 22 episodes and see that natural unfolding of character happen. I can only obsess over the 1.5 hours and 2 hours that I do have. I mean, does that sort of touch on what you're saying? I mean, I don't know. For me, that makes sense. It sort of is something that I know that I can never reach the full explanation of that character's life in that story, but I think that's the beauty of films. It's just that snapshot, and that snapshot informs the rest of the life of that person in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, just to mention, one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this as a discussion group was because I think language is very limited. And as soon as you speak one thing, you're leaving out something else. It's the nature of language. It picks out something, but then it excludes. And I don't think one can really tell the truth alone. I think one needs the various perspectives to fill out the picture. Or one needs to talk for a long time. So on the one hand, I like to emphasize the fact that we are always expressing ourselves and we don't really know others, and it's really hard to create a character that is something other than ourselves. And yet there is definitely another side of it, and there is, I think, something quite magical sometimes about creating characters. And I know through different drafts of a script, I'll often struggle to find a character, and there's this term, what it is to find a character, find the character's voice. And sometimes it's very easy, and sometimes I just can't find it. And then maybe a year or two later, coming back to the same story, the person comes alive, and it's not maybe it's not something separate to me, but it's definitely an aspect of myself or my unconscious that maybe I wasn't connected to before. And suddenly, because I've grown 2 years, some voice comes through, something that brings this character alive, makes it a distinct, makes it real, makes it identical, makes it that person that somebody knows. That maybe is an aspect of myself that I only recently awakened, or maybe it's some other voice that's coming through me and really expressing itself. It's intangible, and it's difficult to say where those words come from when I imagine it for a character. And I think for me, I mean, I also feel a lot of humility in creating characters when one says, can one capture it? Personally, I feel like life's constantly, I'm discovering myself. There's things I don't really know who I am. I think partly my journey is kind of revealing myself to myself. And when I think of other people, I think every person's this entire world, and they're actually so much. And what comes through in a moment, what comes through in a scene, it's just it's a snapshot. It's like what you're saying with the feature, it's just a snapshot, and that the actual being is so much more. So I do approach character with a lot of humility, but there is something that can be very satisfying when the characters do start to speak to you, and when they do start to just kind of make their own characters known. And it does come across sometimes it just, as you say, you don't necessarily need to see all the rest, but there's something of the essence of the character. And when you really know them, they can express that even within the limited thing. And then there's a flow to what's happening. And I never find that on the first draft, almost never. Some characters, I like generals, the general character. Sometimes I just wrote a script with a general, And I love it because it's, just a dude on a mission for action. Like, it's just, I'm taking action and he's got the power, and it's just like, you rock up. And there's a part of me that does that easily because I can, that's kind of my own most core archetype. And but other things are further from me, so like writing female characters, I think, can be challenging. I think I know women quite well, but there's a different way of navigating the world. And often I don't find like my female characters immediately. Like, I really have to, play with them and then run them past some of the women in my life, and still, it's something that eventually comes, but not really. Whereas, sorry, as I say that, actually, I'm just thinking into and feeling into the character that actually took me most out of all my films was like a black Nyanga who was an elder. And his experience was so far from mine, and I knew what sort of character I wanted, and I knew like what I wanted him to be. But through 3 drafts lasting about 3 years, I couldn't find him. I couldn't find his voice. And he came like piece by piece. And later things I was around, oh, he's a storyteller. Okay. He's like, and that little detail like really helped me find an aspect of the character. But still later, like he wasn't quite, he never felt right, and he never felt right. And then what happened now is, just in terms of our production thing, is we've decided to merge him with this other character who was also mental, who was a woman. And I don't think he was ever meant to be there, and I could never find him. And he wasn't meant to, I just don't think he was meant to be there. But it was a process, and it's like me tapping, again, an elder and someone who's really actualizing the spiritual thing is a little bit further from my own life experience, and particularly in that tradition. And so finding exactly how he'd be was very hard. But also, I think he wasn't meant to be there. So there is something sometimes magical where someone does present.
I mean, yeah, that's crazy, because what I'm hearing is that you've set yourself a sort of standard for which you're saying, okay, this character has been explored enough in this moment or in this story for me to say, yes, we can actually go shoot this now. And that's fascinating for me, because it means that there's definitely a certain level of maybe taste or a certain level of intuition that you're applying to your own work to say, yeah, the first draft isn't enough for that character, because there's another side that needs to be explored before that person can have their own voice. And I think that's something I don't think anyone can teach you. I think you've written so much, you've engaged so much with this art form of cinema and of TV, that you've actually built in your own, I won't say bullshit detector, but the idea is that it's this thing where you can hear a voice. And I think that's probably the one thing that new writers struggle with, being able to fine tune their ears to be able to pick up, okay, that is a fleshed out person that feels like a person. Obviously, I take the crib notes of, okay, I put the character down, I'll work with an actor later on to actually figure out who is that person fully fleshed out. Which I think is fantastic. I think that's great. I think if anyone over here has their own, I mean, I see Nelson over here agrees with me. If anyone over here has their own bullshit detector in terms of voice discovery, that, I mean, I want them to talk about it, actually, because I think we're running out of time right now. But I do want them to talk about it. When does character feel right for them? When do they feel like they've explored enough of the story? I actually just want to mention one thing that I think defines how I see character in story. Because I don't know, I think I'm mad in this regard. I just see series of moments, series of frames every time I'm writing. I'm not trying to overthink it. I'm actually just trying to capture this movie that's playing out in my head. And one of the things that Guillermo del Toro mentioned recently, I think it was him, or was Inarritu or Coran, they were sitting at a table together. It's a conversation with Charlie Rose. They were talking about in what makes cinema, or rather what makes the visual frame, this moving thing, this motion picture, whether it's on series, on TV, or in the cinema, in the actual theater. So what makes it an art form? What makes it different from writing for a novel, writing for a stage play, etc. And he ironed it out as this thing that we have, this frame, it's the one medium in which the audience and the character discover information at the same time, discover ideas, discover things that are happening around them at the same time. It's the one thing that allows us to have that thing. And what I mean by this is that an entire world exists outside of the frame. But if we so allow for it to happen, we can let that frame with that character, us following that character, we can allow that to be the mode in which we take in information. You contrast that with a novel, for example. A novel, you have to set up the entire stage talking about everything happening around this person before you can allow that person to do things in that stage, if that makes any sense. And if you're watching something in theater, you see the entire world of the theater box. You see the actors moving in to do something with the main character long before you see that character or hear that character do something. And really, that's the thing about cinema and series. The frame allows us for us to actually tell the story for the character and the audience at the same time. That process of discovery. And just jumping off that, I think a lot of the films that I've really loved and enjoyed are films in which not much is happening to that character to define the world around it. But when something seismic happens, when something fundamental happens, it's because they've made a decision to finally do something, or they've not. And the world falls apart around them as a result. Think of Macbeth. Macbeth refusing to change his ambition is what destroys his world and destroys everything around him. And he's at a point, he is offered a choice. He can surrender to Macduff, and he refuses to. He's like, no, I am who I am, and I will not apologize for that. And he goes out and he dies. I think a lot of great films have that same thing in mind. I've mentioned The Godfather, obviously. I like looking at cinema in that respect. When we're dealing with characters, we're dealing with us having the opportunity to unfold a story at the same time as that character learns the story. And I think that provides us with an exciting form of tension. I'm going to just let, Gavin, before obviously we hand over to our participants over here, people who have come in to discuss these things with us. I would like you to say something, and then please, if you don't mind, having a look at chat and answering some of the comments that are there.
Sorry, I was actually looking at the chat as you were speaking in preparation. What did you want me to speak to just before that?
Oh, I think you've actually said everything you needed to. I think you actually highlighted it perfectly, what character means for you. And really, you don't let a film go out into the world until you've ironed out. I mean, when I say a film, I mean the screenplay in particular, until you've really, given each character that you feel that you need to give a real fair shake, a real chance for that voice to develop. And I think that's admirable. It means you spend a lot longer writing that screenplay than someone like for myself would. But I think that ultimately leads to you having a beautiful sense of your characters being fleshed out things operating in this stage. And I think that's cool. I think that's admirable.
Thank you. Yeah, then I'll just have one final comment then before we open up, and I will speak to that question around bios that was near the top of the chat. There's a beautiful Bob Dylan line which has been stated by other people in different ways, but it's he not busy being born is busy dying, and that is, I think, at the absolute fundamental of what story is. It's that process of death and rebirth as we let go of old self and become new self. And what you said was exactly what I was trying to say. Also, generally, what a writer needs, that it's always about your understanding of character and how character relates to life. And knowing yourself, I think, is kind of the first thing. But really being tuned into others, really knowing what others are going through and feeling them and hearing them and really genuinely showing up for others, I think, is how we come to learn character and how we get to know character and how we write good character. It's really by being tuned into character in our life and its expression all around us. So in terms of writing character bios, Pindile asked, writing character bios is one of my weaknesses. I really want to master it. I want to know, what do you include when you write a character bio? So for me, that I kind of am looking at what has shaped that character. So the basic biographical details of exactly when they were born. For instance, that first thing, exactly. Don't give me like 40s, 30s. Give me an exact number, an exact date. because, exactly the age and generation means these are the events that, were prominent when they were growing up. These were the events that were prominent when they were, a young adult. This was the economic status that they were confronted with. This was, the war that was going on at the time, or whatever else it is. You got to know when they were born, where they were born, who they were born to, because obviously, the parents will be a massive influence on who a child becomes and the sort of traumas that they sustain. And then, traumatization is kind of the essence of character. Like there's a wounding will come in, like childhood is essentially a traumatization period where the fundamental spirit of a being comes up against the reality of the world we've created. And our world is filled with, traumatized people, and it's filled with like dramatic, challenging events, and with people who, aren't, showing up with love in their hearts for you. And we all sustain a huge amount of traumatization as children that basically when we become adults, hopefully we can heal. Alternatively, we get stuck in the traumatic patterns. And figuring out, who suffered what in their childhood, and how it's affected them. What did they go through by being in this place at that time with those people? What is their religion? What is their color? What is their, all those things that kind of affect your worldview and also how people view you need to be kind of thought about. And then, their particular passions in life, what's really calling them to do, that needs to be considered, and whether they actually do it or whether they run away from it. And if they do run away from it, then what do they wind up spending their time doing? Because where we put our energy molds us. There's a relationship there. So for me, those are kind of the big things. It's like tracking the story of what shaped the person and how they responded to the influences to become who they are now. And I don't, I generally kind of 1 to 2 pages, I feel I can do that. But it is by making specific choices. And it doesn't really matter what choices you make. As soon as you start making choices, then the character will become in shape. As soon as I say they're 32 and not 38, and I place a date on them, and then I know, okay, well, where were they born? Okay, they're Eastern Cape folk in this particular town. What's that town like? Etc. Then it comes alive, and I can always make new choices for them. If it doesn't fit, if the character is not really appropriate to their role, I can say, okay, they're not 32. They need to be a bit older and more mature, so they're going to be 45, and you play. But the more you can be specific, the better. So you don't need to write forever. You just have to be very specific and make the choices. What do you think, Thabiso?
Yeah, I'm actually going to add to that. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm just going to add to that by actually working. I think I'm going to show you some of the documents that I sometimes go through, because what you're asking is specificity. The whole idea is that you are asking many questions about, just 1 second, I think, yeah, I don't know if this is showing up over here. It should be character development. I don't know if you guys are seeing it. Yeah. Okay, so basically the whole idea behind character development is you're asking very specific questions, and those specific questions you're answering yourself. And it's actually called the Socratic method, where you're asking many different questions in the hopes of getting answers that are very specific. And I think in this particular case, I'm showing something over here, as Gavin has mentioned. I don't know if it's showing up. This is a character development on top. It does. Okay, great. So as Gavin mentioned, having a brief bio, which is basically talking about, okay, who is this person? What age are they? What race are they? What culture? What religion? All of these things. If in specifying these things, you actually start fleshing out the character. And if you find yourself struggling with the character bio, really what you're perhaps not doing is asking yourself a question, writing it down, ask yourself another question, writing it down. So if you're struggling with a particular character, really try to nail down the details. And those details, the devil is in the details. You might find yourself answering many more of the things that you want through that. So, things like, what are they good at? What do they suck at? What are they truly afraid of? These are the things that if you can, in some small way, answer those things before you write a screenplay, or maybe in addressing a revision to your screenplay, a new draft. If you can try to figure these things out, you actually have a much better chance of telling a much stronger character bio. And really what you want to be able to do, I'm just going to share another thing with everyone over here. What you want to be able to do is to end up with something that looks a bit like this. So if you can see over here, it says character biographies. And really the idea is you want your protagonist, antagonist, whatever, to, within a nutshell, have something that's really powerful, have something that's really driving that character forward or not driving them. So if I look, for example, this is a document that's based off American Beauty. American Beauty, if anyone has seen it here, it has very fundamental suburban questions of life, jealousy and things like that. But the main character, in a nutshell, is listed over here as Lester Burnham. So Lester Burnham he's aged, he's mid-40s, and he's having a midlife crisis. Within one sentence, you have an idea of who this guy is. You have someone who you can maybe even relate to, because at every point, everyone in this group, everyone in life has had a crisis of identity. That's a major reason why you're writers, because you've answered that question by saying, no, I do want to create, I do want to craft. So if you read this, it's he's having a midlife crisis. Now we define the world around him. He's caged in what he considers to be a fruitless job and marriage, and with a daughter who hates him, or at least considers him irrelevant. Life has no meaning for him anymore. So the way you get to something like this paragraph, is by asking yourself several questions and really answering those questions in the written form. At least that's how I've treated it. Other people have different ways of doing it. But if you do that more and more often, you might find yourself in the shower thinking, okay, this scene, this character, but they wouldn't do this. And then you're running out of the shower, racing to the final draft, trying to get down that idea before it disappears from your head. At least that's how I found it to be the case. Yeah, I don't know. Does that sort of touch on what we were talking about, Gavin?
Sure. I was actually, I'd be quite curious. Do you mind just getting that up again? Because I actually think it's worth just speaking to in terms of just clarifying what I was saying.
Sure. Which one? The
Lester Burnham.
Okay, great. Let me just get to it. So yeah, just to give you an idea, this is actually just an outline document, which I received at one point and I redeveloped and fleshed out and so forth. So this is a small character bio, and it's Lester Burnham, as I said, from American Beauty. Yeah.
Okay. So partly, I guess the reason I thought it was worth looking at is because essentially everyone has their own understanding of character. You've got your own relationship to it, and it's something we'll need to find. Like, how do we figure out who someone is in order to work with them? And I was speaking to my own, but if you look at what this person's written and what aspects of the character are relevant and why it's actually quite nice. Aged mid-40s, I always like to be a bit more specific than that, but 44, 45 in America, in suburban world, you could probably guess the background fairly well in terms of what brought him there, what kind of suburban life he had before he wound up in the same suburban life. Caged in what he considers to be both a fruitless job and marriage, and with a daughter who hates him, at least considers him irrelevant. Life has no meaning for him anymore. He survives through fantasizing of himself as another man, one who seizes the day and speaks his mind. So in those sentences, we're getting a sense of the wound, because, here's a man who's not living his authenticity. He's stuck in a job that's, is fruitless for him, a marriage that's fruitless. So, you get that sense that, this isn't fruitful. And a daughter hates him because, he's not living his truth, and he is irrelevant. He's just kind of ghosting through life, his own life. He survives through fantasizing himself as another man who seizes the day and speaks his mind. There you get what he needs, because his fantasy is of the man that his soul's calling him to be and that he's not being. Thus, his world is a mix of drudgery and dreams, and is ripe for the day of reckoning that always looms when one who has lost his grip on reality does, in fact, seize the day. So that flaw and need are just, constantly there. And here he's kind of just described the situation as it is when we meet him. And that's it. And, if then one was to flesh out the bio, one would start thinking, well, how did he get there? Okay, so he got into a job that he doesn't like, he's stuck with it, he's gone to marriage. Was it always fruitless? Was it good? Did it get bad? And you start answering those questions, and you're just working back from where you see him and where you want to explore him. But then you have to come up with a history that leads there. And how was it that he made that choice to? How did he hold himself back? Where did he stop speaking his truth? What was it? Was it the dominating wife? Was it the dominating parents? Was it society that told him that he should always be such and such? And for everyone, it's going to be slightly different. Even if you get to the same place, it's going to be slightly different. And yeah, you're going to choose what works for your character and how you see it. But essentially, through the flaw, you can find out, where it started. And it has to just make sense. It has to be that the one thing will lead to another, and that's partly your understanding of life. So, it might be that there was the dominating parent, and you just looked at a childhood where anytime he wanted something, he was told to shut up, or he was told no, or he was told it doesn't matter what you want, you just do what you're supposed to. And then that person becomes a character. And whether you ever call upon that person or not, that for your Lester, there's this person who, in a sense, represents their nemesis, and who's responsible is the externalization of their traumatization. And you've got stuff to play with, but it's always about making sense. How does life really put you into a place where you are this?
Yeah, so I'm just going to speak a bit more to Pindile's, I think, query. This is what you're seeing on screen right now is typically what you would find in a narrative treatment, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs of this exact thing per main character and so forth. What Gavin is talking about really is a deep discussion, a deep unveiling of character that happens in a character bio or a character Bible that is written somewhere else and then cleaned up and then put into a treatment. But really, it's so worth asking deep questions about your character and really getting down to, as I think has been mentioned before, what is the thing that drives them, and is that a flaw? Is that what really they're afraid of? Because most stories are based on 2 kinds of failure. One's failure through death and failure through the soul and loss of the soul. So a lot of stories are defined by those kinds of things, and you only really get to that after taking a whack and really looking at character over and over again. And it's difficult. It's actually, and it's supposed to be difficult, because what we'll talk about in the next meeting structure is primarily defined on these questions. Great. So someone asked, is it Tari asked, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, Tarai actually. Can I have a copy of the document? Sure, no problem. If anyone wants this document or any kinds of documents, I think they're freely available online. I think the NFV have had the original version of this outline, but if anyone does want it, just put your email into the chat group as it is over here. I'll send it to you. I have no problem. I want everyone to have great characters. The mysticism behind characters should be debunked thoroughly, because I think that we should have stories across the board from South Africans that represent great storytelling. Can I have the recording? Yeah, I mean, we can definitely make something happen for you. But before any of this stuff, I mean, if you want this document, also if you want the recording, maybe put your email address over here. I'm glad I pronounced this right. Which version did I pronounce right? Was it the first or the second? What I would like really is for anyone in the group to really chime in. Even if it's a point or a question, we're here for you. We've got time. We really want to speak to you guys. And also really, if you can, please put your camera up.
Will you stop the screen share?
Oh yeah, let me actually just, sorry, my bad. You can type or speak into the mic. We don't mind whatsoever. So I just read right now, Myers-Briggs type questionnaire and Enneagram are useful. Yeah, that's actually true. I think a lot of people have different ways of dealing with how they discover character. Primarily, if you are dealing with the Myers-Briggs test, that's great as well. You can look at the certain archetypes. If you're someone who wants archetypes in your story, you can definitely do that. But also asking deep questions about yourself as well. When you're writing a character goes a long way as well.
I'll also just like to chime in to you, Kate, that if that sort of thing interests you, there's an incredible work called The Gene Keys. And the Gene Keys deals with the 64 archetypes and the 64 kind of primal woundings that we all carry, and also offers a chart for the themes of your own life. But in it, there's a reactive and a repressive version of each shadow. And then what the highest stages of evolution around that same core genetic expression are. And it's an incredibly useful work. I often now will come up with the gene key that matches the flaw of each of my characters as a nice guide.
I'm just.
Say again.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes, please, go ahead.
In character Bibles, I've also included how your protagonist and your, say about 3 of your minor characters feel about each other. How is that on target, or what is your comment to that approach, please?
I'll just quickly say that's perfect. I think there's no reason why you shouldn't have that. I think it does clarify things. It also clarifies a lot of story expectations if you want that. Maybe they're family members, and perhaps the story is about how they either don't like or do like each other, and what they're willing to do for each other, what they're not willing to do. And I think if that works for your story, if that works for your characters, talking about, or maybe he feels about this person, it leads a lot of opportunities to be explored in the story itself. So I don't see a problem with it. Just that so long as you don't make that the primary obsession of the character, the primary description of that character, that they hate someone. We're trying to uncover people, not who they are within the lens of other people. That, if that makes any sense.
Okay, thank you. And I do have another question while I've got screen. I'm busy with a story where one of my protagonists is actually a dog. Do you think you can get as much out of an animal character as you can a human character or not? Your opinion on that?
Well, I'm going to let Gavin speak first before I give my opinion.
I was so waiting for you, but
I do have an opinion.
So I think it's a very hard question to answer, because I think it's really going to depend on whether you can. And I've never really worked with a animal protagonist. My suspicion is that kind of not because they can't speak in a way that the audience can understand, but on the other hand, how you play with it could be very interesting. And one thing I've observed about dogs is that very often they mirror their owners, so completely, that their character is kind of also defined in relationship perhaps to the other characters in the script. So yeah, what do you think, Thabisa?
Look, I can really only talk about 2 major kinds of films that have animals in them. One is the anthropomorphized animal, which is an animal in which we can hear the thoughts of, we can treat as a human being, basically, because we see things happening, their discussions in their own heads, or how they talk to other animals. We think of 101 Dalmatians. Most of the time it's an animation. We rarely see it in live action films. The other one is a dog character or a cat character in which we explore them through their owner, or we explore them through someone around them. So it's like the relationship they have towards that person, what they do for that person, what they don't do for that person. And that unveils, the nature of the dog or the nature of the cat. I think it's very difficult to, it is very difficult, but not impossible. I do think it's very difficult to have a central character being a dog if we can't hear them, or if we can't see them doing anything that allows for us to, unveil what they are, what their nature, what their motivations are. But it's not impossible. I do think that if they could make a film about a tire, a serial killer tire, which goes around and kills people. It's called Rubber, by the way. It's an actual film. If they can do that, then you can definitely make a film about a live action film about a dog. It's just that, how do you show character with them? Once again, you normally show character in film through what they say and what they do. So you have to really focus on those things to try to tell the story for this animal or this main character. Sorry, not animal, main character. I don't know, Sila, if we've answered, your questions, if we've given some insight.
Yes, you have. I think, I was just thinking about what are my expectations of myself in developing the story, and especially listening to both of you, that put even more pressure on me. Thank you very much. So I just wanted your perspective on it. So thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I just said Thabisa was a much better answer than mine.
No, it's just what I observed. I just want to quickly just jump back to the chat, because I think there are a couple of questions that have been asked over here.
Yes. Also, I just wanted to get into that because Felicia did ask about character quirks. And she says, what makes the character stand out from other characters matter? Are they important? And for me, just, quirks have to relate to the wider character. Like if it's, it wasn't meant to be a quirk, is it just, I'm going to give the guy funny glasses? And in a comedy, funny glasses can be nice. They're great comedic props. But otherwise, I think it's just, again, it's kind of, what are the natural quirks of character? So, if it's not a device, but if it actually arises from the way they are and what's happened to them, then I think they are important. But it really doesn't start with the quirks. It starts with the character, and then, how that expression is like manifested in them.
Yeah, I want to actually go back a bit and go back to Tuli's question, because she actually asked, where do we draw the line between bio and storyline? Because reading Lester's paragraph, it seems more like a storyline than a bio. So look, what you've read over there is a distillation of motivation, a distillation of dilemma. So yes, those things will be unpacked in the actual plot of the story. But the plot of the story is not what you're reading in that paragraph. What you're reading are the ingredients to make that story. And when you watch the film, in fact, I'm going to send the document. I really want everyone to watch American Beauty. I think it's a fantastic film about character. It's got a very problematic main actor, as we know Kevin Spacey to be. But if you take that aside and you watch the film for what it is, it's really something. It's Sam Mendes, beautiful film. You should watch it. You'll see what I mean, that the ingredients are placed into the character bio, but the cake itself is made in the story.
Also, so can I speak to that as well? Because a bio is, in a sense, a storyline. It's the story of the character's life and how they became who they are. So it's not entirely distinct.
So Jen has actually put down over here, Donkey and Shrek, once again, anthropomorphized, Eddie Murphy, of course, his characteristics comes through fully in the film, and that's the beauty of Shrek. And Seabiscuit was an interesting character. But you mustn't forget that Seabiscuit, if I remember correctly, that's the Tobey Maguire film as well. So what we feel towards Seabiscuit is also expressed through Tobey Maguire's character's struggle, his entire storyline and plot arc with the animal. Because that's, I think, is an animal which we don't see or hear. I can't really remember that film though. I just remember Tobey Maguire, and I think that's part of the relations we sometimes have with films. Character quirks, I agree with you. If it's a character quirk that doesn't speak to who the character is, it's not a character quirk. It's a detail that's misplaced. I think that, Kate, you want to ask a question?
No. I wanted to ask Sila whether she was writing for live action or animation, because obviously animation animals speak and are fully characterized all the time. And then I just watched Cruella, which is live action, and there are dogs in that who don't speak and have fully formed characters who you can get to know who they are by how they act and react. They're their own, they're their own beings. But I mean, I'm also, my dogs are my children and they've got very distinct personalities. So I'm a very big dog person. So they constantly show me who they are by how they act and react, and not just instinctive things. I gave them each a chewy the other day, and their cushions were apart, and the one dog watched the other dog with a strange expression on his face while the other dog finished his chewy. And the minute the other one had finished his chewy, he then started to eat his chewy in front of the other dog very, very slowly. And I was like, what? You know, like that. It was like such a mean thing that he did. And it was so deliberate. And it was like, yeah, you're going to eat yours, and then I'm going to torture you by eating mine slowly in front of you. And that was a total character choice that he made that revealed a lot about himself. Anyway, so, but that would be difficult to do in a live action. So obviously that's CGI or animation. And that's a big part of the world I come from. I write for live action animation. And I've taught for 3 years in 2D animation, and I teach pre-production. And a big part of what we do is character development. So we use a character questionnaire, like you put up, Tabuso. We give that to the students to fill out about their characters. I make them do the Myers-Briggs questionnaire and Enneagrams. And they're just very quick, they're tools that are very quick ways of forming a skeleton. And then you can start fleshing that skeleton and dressing that skeleton. And especially for secondary or support characters, it's a very good way to start building your cast. It's a great toolbox. And then I often find when I'm doing the Enneagram, it'll say your character should do this, or your personality should be like this. And then I'll go, hold on, but my character does that. And then that's immediately starts actually then helping make the character rounder. I'll go, the character should behave like this, but actually because of this, they do that. And then they start becoming more and more dimensional to me. And then, like Gavin says, the minute they start speaking to you, speaking back to you, or taking over a scene, or start keeping you awake at night, then you know you've got to your characters become a person, you know, like a friend. And you can put them in any scene and understand how they would react and act. And sometimes they can surprise you by doing the opposite, because they've become a being with their own motivations. See, Jen's also saying she's got a dog. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. And I also just posted on a group today exactly this thing about where I was, because I did some external evaluation for third-year film scripts. And in each case where the story was weak, it was because they hadn't thought through the character. And they didn't, and I'd ask questions about the character, not about the plot. I'd ask, what is the circumstance of your character? Do they have parents? How are they affording to live in this house? And they go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And I was like, well, you won't be able to answer that story question until you can answer the character question. So, yeah, character is vital for your concept is your vehicle, your story, your character is the driver. And without a fully formed driver, you've got a crash test dummy driving the vehicle. So I've loved this discussion. I'm all wound up and talkative. Sorry, had to say thank you.
No problem, no problem. I think, Scylla, if you really want a really good example of a character who says nothing throughout the entire film, but is probably one of the most beautiful characters we've ever seen, ever, watch WALL-E. Never says a thing, but is probably one of the best and most beautiful things. But that's Pixar. Pixar is, you know, pushing that envelope when it comes to that. Yeah, so I think if there's anyone who wants to ask a question about character, I think that what Kate has mentioned right now is definitely a really good way of analyzing what may be missing in your characters as well. Because if you are, you know, watching or reading through your script or reading through your story outline and you're asking yourself, something feels missing, something doesn't feel like it's working, perhaps that's another solution that you can explore. I know a lot of writers in this group and writers in general do not do the, you know, answering questionnaires or trying to figure out through a series of questions, predefined questions as to who their characters are. More every single scene, every single detail that they talk about the character or show the character, they ask themselves, but why? So as a main character in a film, main character in a story, they start writing the story and they ask themselves, why is this person Black? Why is this person the guy? Why is this person young or old? And in asking that question, they figure out something more to the story that may not have been present if they had only just gone through rote questions. And I think each and every person has their own way of dealing with things. And that's the beauty of what we do. We're all trying to make screenplays and all the stories are very different. And really trying to find the thing that works for you is key.
Thabiso,
Hi.
yes, in a film, obviously the extent of involvement of different characters differs. So obviously when you flesh out characters, you would then obviously flesh out the protagonist, the antagonist, and some of the supporting characters. Now, my question though is, there are a lot of supporting characters. How far do you go? Do you have to flesh them out, all of them?
Look, it depends on the story you're telling. I think
Mhm.
it's a case where if you're telling a story about 4 people, you're setting yourself up for a very high task, true, but maybe it's a situation where, do you want this film to be about 16 people, or do you want it to be about 2 people with 4 friends? I mean, it depends entirely on the story you're trying to tell. And I personally do think that if you are someone who's starting off with a script, try to limit the number of people that are necessary for the scene or necessary for what you're trying to do. I think that if you go back to our previous discussion 2 weeks ago, which I think if we can try get a recording to everyone, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. In every scene, there are a couple of questions you should be asking yourself in terms of protagonist, in terms of antagonist, what do they want? What is in that room that they both want? Who's going to win? Now, if you think about that as being the driving force for your scene, it doesn't offer a lot of space for supporting characters, if that makes any sense, because you're trying to tell a story about 1 or 2 people or 3 people at most. So if you can get away with telling the story with the least amount of people, that's fine. That's great. But if you want to tell a story like Ocean's 11, where you have three major characters and 8 other characters who are filling in the world, you're going to have to do the work for those 8 characters. It doesn't mean that you're going to be telling stories that are defined by those 8 characters, because really they're there as, part of the formula, part of the cake, right? But they're not the reasons for that cake existing. So once again, it depends entirely on the story you want to tell. I don't know if Gavin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely would, because I really liked what Kate said about character being the driver, and in a sense, it's very true. And with those supporting characters, those characters maybe who just show up for a scene, who aren't even supporting characters, but they're just present for a scene. The more you have thought about them, the more alive the scenes will be. So you do want to give each character as much thought as you can, but obviously you can't get caught in inventing person after person after person. So for me, I mean, one thing we haven't mentioned, which is just, you can't really talk about character without talking about archetypes, because archetypes can be simplified into just calling them functions. So each character, is kind of performing an archetypal role in a scene and in a script. So you kind of got to think, okay, what's this character here to do? Why do I need them? What's their function in the scene? And how much do I need to know about them for them to perform that function truthfully and in a way that's interesting and entertaining? So like earlier, I struggled with that elder Black and Younger character, but he was a mentor. And when I first tried to write him, the dialogue that came was very much like my head teacher sort of person. And, writing a character with that sort of intellectual dialogue was not that character. And it meant those scenes where he was giving that information just sucked, because it wasn't him. It was just my explanation side. But as soon as I kind of really got to understand him, then the way he taught, like, so, okay, he was a storyteller. So, teaching a bit through stories, or, bringing things alive through story, made him a more interesting character. But the more deep I could go with him, then the more interesting those scenes are where he's playing that role. So in each, particularly those like characters who pop up just for a scene, it's you just really got to think, what's their function here, and then how much do I need to know, what do I need to invent to make them a character, so like an interesting character, because the more interesting the character is, the more alive it will be that your protagonist interacts with that person, not someone general, but that person. So there was a nice example last week. I showed a scene where I wrote which had a salesman selling to a hippie, and the salesman was like a supporting character of the film, like quite an important one, but the hippie just came for that scene. But his role there was to be someone who was a difficult sell, because he understood that the car that he was being shown was not super important. So, sorry, it was not super good. It's like the salesman was trying to sell him something that sucked. So all I really needed to like kind of invent for him, one, he was a hippie, and the car was like a 60s folksy bus because it was a 66 period piece. And I wanted someone sort of interesting. I was trying to create a story that was fun. The punchline of the story was the salesman gets arrested, and the cops rock up. It was a true story, and they take him away. And to make an interesting scene where the punchline is he gets arrested, I just wanted to see my salesman at work. And so that hippie character was there just to give a foil for me to see that this guy's not super ethical, so that the punchline comes that he's taken off to jail. So when he's trying to sell like a dud, the guy had to know that this is a dud and be resistant, and also quite, not someone who's just like, oh, well, you're trying something terrible, fuck off, and walks away, but someone who would at least entertain him while he, or be interested and so on. So it was those particulars that I had to think about. So you always just need to keep in mind, what do I need to create for this person in order for them to actually come alive as a character, can perform a function in the scene.
Yeah, okay. Am I correct then in concluding that in terms of the extent of fleshing up that you do, it would differ for example, a protagonist and a supporting character, because you need to know more about the protagonist as compared to the supporting character? Meaning are there fields that you are not necessarily, for example, when it comes to biography, that you can skip when it comes to supporting characters, but you definitely need to complete when it comes to protagonist?
Definitely, because as that driver, as a driving force, the more you know about your protagonist, the better. You can't know enough about your protagonist. And for the main supporting characters, I'd say the same, because then the more truthful and alive the thing will be. But the less important a character is, the less you do need to know about them, because the role they'll play is so much smaller.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I'm opening up the platform to anyone else to ask questions. Or comments.
Just an interesting thing. Something that no one has mentioned, and it's something that I do. I tend to, when I start with the story, and then when I think about a person, I kind of go, this person reminds me of Wendy. Like, this is actually Wendy. And then I kind of put Wendy in there and go, this is how Wendy would relate in this. And I might do that with a number of different people, and even people who, Wendy might actually be a black man in this story, but the black man reacts the way Wendy does, and possibly has and that she tends to. I know that whenever I say this to Wendy, she always goes, oh, she responds like that. So I have this person doing that one annoying thing that Wendy does, and then it tends to kind of build up on that. And I picked that with a lot of, my friends. I do tend to make sure that they're not recognizable. I don't actually recreate them exactly, but I use my friends and family unashamedly. And especially if they've got a little, my brother has a specific way of talking that, quite honestly, sometimes I find quite irritating, but I find that that's quite useful to actually have a real person and go, how would he respond to this? I know how he would respond to it, and then use that. And I don't know if you guys do that, if anyone else does that.
So I'm going to just quickly say something before Gavin, I think, speaks. The only thing I have to say to that is, if it's a tool that works for you, definitely use it if it works for you. The only thing I have to ever say, and really it's a general comment for all characters, leave nothing on the table. So if you are basing some aspects of this character off on other people, don't let unexplained things for those people become unexplained things in your screenplay or in your teleplay. The point of what I'm saying is, it's something that you may know that person so well that the idea of it happening is no longer something that needs to be explained anymore. So when you're putting into a screenplay, you forget, oh crap, what does this mean at all for the story? What does it mean all for the character? So it's good to have like that, that basis model, but like I said, leave nothing on the table. Do your best to bring that thing, that quirk, that way they speak and everything, bring some life to it in your story, bring some life to it in your screenplay so that it makes sense, at least for you or for anyone who's reading it. I don't know if Gavin.
I will always combine that with a character grid. So, I find the character grids are really great, especially if I've got two people that I know who are on there and I kind of go, how would Roger and Wendy relate in that? And I do have this, but I will use a character grid and I'll make sure that everything is written down there. And of course, many of the other things on the character grid will not actually relate to the person that I've cannibalized. It might just be one specific aspect, like the way they talk or the way they walk or the way but I find that having a real person to picture in my head works.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it does. I mean, I was saying earlier, essentially, we can only draw upon our own experience, and the characters that fill our world and our experiences with them are like kind of the meat and the and the rest of what's circulating in us that we can draw upon. It's when as soon as you kind of find those crossovers where one character kind of fits with someone, it does become so much easier to kind of imagine who they are. Or people whose like biography kind of matches what this other character needs to be, and it gives you a guide to what they feel like and sound like. And I think we have to kind of do that, and it's very natural.
I'm just seeing over here that it also works for Kate, which is great. Like I said, with regards to character, if you find that to be something that's useful, and I mean across the board, if you find anything that works to helping you uncover characters or secondary characters, make that your thing. Go for it. Just always be mindful of not letting those things be crutches for the character, letting those things be the be all and end all for this character. So as Jen has mentioned, she also takes grids, and she also takes many series of questions to ask further on, on that person. If it's a friend of hers, it's a different person in the story. They may share characteristics, but those characteristics get interrogated intensively. At least that's what I've understood from what Jen has mentioned right now. So if anyone does that, do that. Once again, leave nothing on the table. Yes, so we have a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to check if anyone has a question or query, and then we'll have a closing statement.
Okay, earlier on you mentioned that the character drives the plot, right? Not the other way around. So now, as a new screenwriter, the mistake that I've made was that I started with the plot without fleshing out my character. How easy is it then to go back? Do I have to restart the script? Do I need to change some dialogues? Because obviously then chances are this person is going to be speaking in a different way. They're going to be making different decisions as well. How difficult is it, having known that now, having to go back and rewrite the script?
I will mention that it can work the other way. Plot can define. You can start the other way. Your plot can lead you to your characters, or your characters can lead you to your plot. It's not. Sometimes the plot does drive the film. It's quite often. But what you're saying for me also sounds like you in the natural process that writers go through, where you do write draft after draft as your story becomes more real to you, and you kind of figure it out. So once you've already got your plot, you definitely should go back and really, really figure out who your protagonist is. And then dialogue will change, scenes will change, but the film will become more alive. And it's very, very worth doing. Like it's when, a lot of the real gems emerge. Sorry.
I'm just going to add to what Gavin has said. I've got the exact same thing to say. Really, it's what the story needs. If your story is very plot driven, if it's high concept, very much an idea that's unfolding and the characters form out of that, then that's your film. If it's the other way around, which is a very low concept, very character driven piece, then of course you need to especially have very strong characters, because that's what we're following, right? So it depends entirely on the story you're telling. There is no right way, but there is definitely a wrong way in which you are making a story that is calling for something and you're not providing it, and that's always ends up with something that doesn't work. So
Yeah.
I would definitely play with both ways. Look, I want to also put it down that if you are dealing with a very high concept film, and I don't say high concept as being sci-fi meets or fantasy or whatever, mainly it's a heist film. So character is kind of secondary to the plot in that case, but maybe aspects of the plot are unfolding because of character. So something goes wrong because someone has done something they shouldn't have because of who they are. So it's an organic process, and it does this the whole time. You're feeding back and forth between these two elements. But if, for example, you're someone who finds a very interesting person within your mind or dreams of something and wants to tell a story about that person, then you're going to have to do a lot of hard work to find out who that person is. And through that, you find the story.
Okay, thank you.
If it helps, when we're talking about character, we're really talking about dilemma. So what is it about this person that needs to be addressed? And are they going to address it or aren't they going to address it? That's the story. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
It also just comes to me to just mention, because it's a nice question to clarify partly some of the things I was saying earlier. So plot is like the external happenings in the world, and character is the internal that either causes it or is affected by it. So, if you have a heist film and your lead character is like a lazy, inept, careless human being, then you're going to have one sort of heist film as that plot plays out, as that character, stumbles his way and messes up because you shouldn't really be a heist person who's like slack. Versus if you have one who's like, that super meticulous OCD, former Navy SEAL, then you've got a whole different character, but you'll have a different heist film as a result. So that thing of how, external and internal meet, that's all you're talking about. So, as you redo your thing, you'll look at the external reality, and then as soon as the internal reality of the character changes, it will have that back and forth that Tabisa's mentioning, as the one influences the other and vice versa.
Just to add 3 examples to what we're talking about, I'm thinking about heist films right now. You have The Rock, which is a heist film of one kind, which is very much plot driven. You have Ocean's 11, which is like a plot driven but also character piece. And then you have Hell or High Water, in which the characters are the major reason for the heist happening and why the heist doesn't. Oh, I'm not going to ruin the film. You should watch it. Hell or High Water. So you've got these 2 different, all of them are about heists, but all of them are fundamentally different because of their characters. Thank you, Silla, for your time. Appreciate it. I think we're going to close up now. It is past. I think everyone has put the emails over here, so you'll be receiving emails from us. Mostly just from a mailing list, but also the documents. And if you guys have any more questions, write them down. Please bring it to the next session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Really appreciate you guys showing up for this.
Thanks, everyone. Be closing off now. Any last comments? Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. Meet you next time. Sharp.
Thanks, Mbuzeni. Good to see you again.
Okay. I'm going to sign off. There's nothing else. Yes.
Gavin, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for today. Thanks, everyone, coming through. And yes, we've gotten all your emails. Thank you.
Guys, thanks.
Cheers, Jen. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.